Okay, got it. All right. I think that's recording.
Yes, you're good.
All right. Okay. So, okay, can you see that, share?
Yeah.
Okay.
We see
So,
that. We see the leaderboard.
yeah, the leaders bulletin here. So, Kimball and Sean and Ladd all have 2, and Jake has 1. And if you go down to the composite score here, if you look at George, if you look at George's brown and cutthroat, they are my guess. Okay. So that's why those are highlighted white. So anyway, I'm leading, but I'm sure if we measure George's, is going to be pretty close. But Mike came in with a couple of nice big, his all-time best cutthroat and his all-time best rainbow. Both we caught him up on the green, so he really jumped up there. And then Kimball caught a really nice rainbow. Other than George's biggest rainbow, it was the biggest one yet. So that's awesome.
Is that cutty measurement from the 24.5 incher I caught or no?
Well, like your cutty measurement, we never measured it, did we?
We measured the big one.
Did we?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
24.5 inches by 12
Okay,
and a half,
good.
something like
Well,
that.
see that right there that's 36, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that would put 4 more on your cutty right there.
Yeah.
So that'd put you at 100. So I'll put that on and see where that George, that's not great. It's not great out here. Okay, but now that we've got that measurement, I'll put that in. Okay, and then I just guessed on your browns. Have you caught a good brown that we
No.
All right. So I just guessed that that's probably the best brown I saw you catch. So anyway,
I haven't caught a good brown this year.
those are fun numbers, fun to do. So everybody send me them in. I put them on Instagram if you haven't seen them. Okay. Next, we've got some good photos here. So here's George's big rainbow. Okay, I want to see that. Check that out, huh? That rainbow that George caught is one of the prettiest rainbows I've ever seen.
That's a pretty one out of the green for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, what was it, 22?
22, yeah.
Yeah, so that was an awesome fish.
Mhm.
Then I caught my, whoops, that's not it. I caught my all-time, or not all-time, but this year, for sure, my best brown. So we'll show you that.
Nice fish, George.
Yeah, it was a pretty one.
Mhm.
So that's my best brown of the year. That was a nice one, huh, George?
Yeah, it was a really good fish.
That one was 24 by 12. Third cast of the day. Boom. Fish on. So that was fun.
We never caught another fish out of that hole but a whitefish.
That's right. We caught
Hey,
a lot of
Lindsay.
fish out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Roger here. Either you or George or both, maybe you can tell us what you caught it on, what type of fly or rig.
Yeah, tell them, George.
Would you kid? Let's see. I caught. I'm
I
trying to
caught mine
remember.
on the blood red squirmy.
I caught that rainbow, Roger. That rainbow, Lindsay, was on that little teeny Betas thing that I tied up, kind of like a WD-40, the one with the
Yeah.
flash tail. It's like a size 18.
Yeah, mine was on a blood red squirmy. Then here's Kimball's awesome. I mean, that's a nice one. That was 22 by 12, Kimball.
Nice.
22 by 13.
Yeah. So that's a beast.
That's a tank.
What did you catch it on, Kimball?
I caught it on a bob scud wrapped with a little wire to kind of give it like a, well, just a bob scud, but with a little bit of a wire wrap around it
All right.
to kind of make it segmented. Anyway, yeah.
Nice fish. So anyway.
Hey, Lindsay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Roger. And I'm a newbie, so I got some questions here. On the three of the fishes that the catches that we just witnessed, were they a dry fly fishing or a streamer fishing or a nymph fishing?
Nope, all three of them were nymph fishing with the indicator drop shot. And we're going to go over that tonight here, okay?
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump in. Graphics, hoping this thing will work the way I drew it up here.
Don't forget to hit record if you haven't, Lindsay.
Yeah, I can see it's
It's
recording. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to share this. Hopefully we can see this. This will be good. All right, so first of all, can you guys see that where it says high stick nymph fishing?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So, this is how I learned 40 years ago how to basically nymph fish. And this is a drop shot rig. So if you can see my little sign as I'm moving it up, right? I learned how with a spinning rod, and this line here is high visibility strand line. Okay, we'd put a swivel on there and then we'd put 6-inch monofilament, and then we'd tie 3 different tags off, and then we'd put the sinkers on the bottom. And the cool thing about it was there was 4 different colors of caddis. Since there's so many caddis in the river, the guy that taught us how to do this, and I fished this basically for 15 years. Okay, then come along Jason, buddy of mine. Well, what I was going to show on this, if you look at how we Euro nymph right now, it's almost the same. Okay, the only difference is there's no sinkers on here. All the weight's on the fly. Okay, and if you look at the line right here, this is called cider. It's a high visibility line, and you watch that line instead of having an indicator. Okay, and then your leader on this is really thin. I usually fish 5X and 6X on the Provo River. If I'm up on the green, I go up one size higher, but you can see it's almost the same setup. Okay, then what I learned after that is how to fish with an indicator or a tapered leader. Okay, so if you look at a tapered leader, basically it starts out really thick, gets thinner and thinner and thinner. Okay, your sinkers are above your flies. Okay, and your flies are tied in line. So this first fly right here is tied with a clinch knot. Then you put about a foot of, and this same thing on the Provo River. I used to fish with 4X up on the green. I'd fish 3X if I was catching rainbows, especially. But this was usually 4X, then a fly, 4X, then a fly, 4X, and the final fly. So I was fishing with 3 flies, but the sinker was above. And this is important to understand because if you see this, when the sinker's hitting, your flies are floating who knows where, up around and whatever. And you can tie this up with tags just like you do in a drop shot rig. But this is how I fish for, probably about 5 years. And then I ran into George, and George literally smoked me. And, I thought, well, it's a fluke. And, after the 4th or 5th time, as he was catching 5 fish to 1 or 10 fish to 1, it's like, okay, I got to change. So here's George's. I'm going to blow the, if I blow that up, does it make it any bigger for you guys, or it's still the same size?
It makes it smaller. Go back to what you had.
Better like
You
that?
can-
That's better.
if
Yeah.
you go into that zoom, if you go into that blown up view lens, you can just hit the magnification down in the bottom right.
Oh, yeah.
There's a, yeah, hit the plus. There you go.
There you go.
So how does that work? Pretty good?
That's better. That's good.
Okay,
Yep.
so here's George's rig. And this is a drop shot rig, but it's really tight line. So George, you start explaining it and I'll kind of move along with this cursor as you explain it.
Well, so this is just the way I do it, and I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but this is just what over time I've done. So I usually start up. Your fly line has a loop connection on your fly line. Most of you have seen that, right where Lindsay's cursor is. And then I'll tie onto that cursor. Oh, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 inches. I'll take a piece of 20 or 30 pound, kind of whatever I have, but usually about 20 pound. And I tie 2 perfection loops. And then I do a loop to loop with that fly line and that piece of 20 pound monofilament, that 8-inch piece. And then there's another perfection loop on the other end where I tie that 0, 1x, 2x, whatever. It kind of depends where I'm fishing. When I fish up on the Snake, I always go with 0x because there's some pretty big fish in there. They're big fish in the green, but on average, the Snake, I think we have a chance at some bigger fish. But
so as I'm moving this cursor, is that coinciding with what you're saying? Good, George?
yeah, it's right there.
Okay.
That 1x, the first segment is 1 to 0, 0 to 2x, whatever.
Okay, good.
And I usually
is right here, guys, where George does 2 perfection loops. I always tie in a tippet ring. So you can
yeah, and that's another that way you can just tie 2 clinch knots if you want, one to each side of the tippet ring, and you don't have to necessarily learn how to tie a perfection loop, but I'd learn to tie a perfection loop if I were you. It is super simple. It's not that hard. Anyway, so I tie that in, and then I'll come down. I don't know, probably depending where I'm fishing. So on the Snake, I use pretty long leader. Probably I usually fish with probably a 14-foot leader, but I wouldn't do that to start with. But anyway, so usually that section is anywhere between, I'll say 5 and 7 feet long. Something like that, right? At least 5 feet, but 5 to 7 feet long. And then I'll tie in a tiny little swivel. And when I say a swivel, it's not a snap swivel. It's just the barrel swivel off of a snap swivel, but they're tiny. The smallest ones I could ever find were about, I want to say size 18s. And then they were snap swivels, and I cut the snaps off and just used the barrel. But that keeps all this other stuff from the droppers from tangling, from wrap. They don't tangle, they wrap around that line, and it kind of keeps them from not doing that. But then I'll take, whether I'm fishing 3x, 4x, and I rarely fish with anything lighter than 4x. I just don't. And not that I shouldn't. I may hook a few more fish, but I hook enough that I don't really care right now. But that's always an option, right? 2 things are always an option when you're fishing this way. Add more weight and go smaller on your leader, right? If you're not hooking up and you can see fish, or there's fish there, and you're fishing with something that's like Kimball said, a bob scud or some kind of a scud on the green, just a scud or what am I thinking of, Linz? Sow bug. A sow bug or a worm or squirmy worm, and you've always caught fish, or you've got something small like a Baetis pattern, they'll take it. You can always put more weight on. You can always drop your leader size. So those are things that if fishing's tough, then I'll drop down the leader size sometimes to 5x to see if it's just because the fish are being leader shy for some reason.
Okay. And what are your typical 3 flies then, George, right here?
So like, for example, on the green, the bottom fly will usually either be like some kind of a woolly bugger, a balanced leech, or most typically it'll be a squirmy worm. And then my second fly is some kind of a waltz worm, sow bug, something or other. And then the top fly will be some kind of a, Betas, PMD, a midge of some kind, if there are midges around. Usually that's what I fish with.
What I'll do is I usually fish the same thing: the bigger fly on the bottom, the medium fly in the middle, and the smallest fly on the top. And then as I'm fishing, let's say I'm just catching the heck out of them with a bob scud, I may change and fish with 2 bob scuds and a
Right.
worm. Okay, or if I'm just hammering them with the worm, I may fish these bottom 2 with the worm. So when George and I were up there last week, a blood red squirmy's been money for us. Well, I put on an orange one, and when I got to the 2016 hole down there, every fish I caught, they were all cutthroat, was with the orange squirmy worm. So you can switch it up like that, and that's the nice thing about 3 flies. One problem, if you're a brand new fisherman, I'd probably recommend you start off with 2 instead of 3, so you're not tangling up as much.
Yeah, the problem is if you start catching a lot of fish on that fly number 1, you're going to be undoing tangle, especially if the fish comes out of the water like Jones.
Yep.
Most of the time you're going to be taking a tangle out, and a lot of people don't like that, but it's just part of hooking and catching a lot of fish. I really don't care. I've gotten used to it. Clip off the flies, take off my singers, untangle it, and tie them all back on. I'm back in business in 7 to 8 minutes. I don't care. So,
and some, most of the break-offs that I have are the fish breaking it off, and they're flipping around, jerking around, catching it in the net and whatnot. But that's just part of the deal.
yeah, I most of the time when I lose flies, it's because the fish is rolling around in the net. But you're right. Yeah.
So talk about this tag at the bottom here.
Well, and then the tag on the bottom. So, from that third dropper, you always want to tie one size smaller than your line. That way, if your sinkers hang up and you have to break the sinkers off, then you either just break the sinkers off or the tag off. You don't lose all your flies. So you'll always want to go, if you're fishing with 4X, your dropper's 5X, or if it's 5X, your dropper's 6X. In fact, I have 6X tippet for one reason, pretty much, as I use it if I'm nymph fishing 5X, which is not very often, but I just don't fish, even dry fly fishing. The lowest I'll fish is 5X. I don't, that's just me.
Now, you guys that are fishing on the Provo River, when I Euro nymph most of the time, but when I guide someone on the Provo, I usually teach them how to do both. I'll teach them how to do drop shot, and I'll teach them how to Euro nymph. And when I'm putting this rig together on the Provo, I'm fishing with 5X on my tags and a 6X sinker drop. And that's because the river runs at about 150 cubic feet a second all year. It's just really shallow. Okay, but as you get to the bigger water, the green, the snake, others like that, you're definitely going to want the bigger ones, especially if you're catching rainbows. You catch those big rainbows up there on the green in the fast water, you better have 3X on, or you're going to snap them off.
You can do 4X if you're careful, but 5X, you just don't have a prayer. Like that fish Lindsay showed you that picture of, that probably took about 10 or 12 minutes for me to land that thing. I mean, that thing had come in and then all the way back out to my backing almost, probably 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, you probably ended up at least 100 yards, if not more, downriver.
Oh yeah, it took me a long ways downriver. And I mean, it was only a 22-inch fish, but it was just one of the fattest fish we've seen, in a couple of trips. It was super fat.
Well, and rainbows are fight harder, and sometimes you get what we call athletes. It may not be the biggest fish, but these things are just athletes.
They think they're bigger than they are, for sure.
That's exactly right.
But if you guys look at this setup compared, for example, so if you look at a Euro rig, right? So a Euro rig, if you look at where it's coming out of the rod and just picture the indicator right there, I know it's not going the same way, but if Lindsay could show him standing downstream in the current and that coming downstream to him, it's very, very much the same as Euro nymphing. I mean, in reality, right? It's very much the same. That if you had that weights were just a big heavy fly, it would basically be your rod tip is that indicator. It's doing kind of the same thing. It's really an effective way to catch fish. I mean, as
Oh,
far as fishing goes, it's super effective. If you just kind of get into the nuances of it, right? It's a very effective way. I know Kelly Gallup talks about this in a couple of his videos. Lindsay, I think you've watched him, but he's you know, as far as nymphing goes, he does a lot of this drop, what he calls drop shot. But
Oh yeah. We'll talk about too how you can use a balanced leech down here instead of
well,
sinking.
and so when we fish on the Snake River, if we're fishing below American Falls Reservoir, so that rock there is all basalt, right? It's lava flow. That whole river bed is basically lava. And if you happen to, I mean, I've literally had been doing something and dropped my flies on a thing, went to pick my rod up, and my fly gets caught on, I mean, it's right by my feet, gets caught on that lava rock. You can't get it off. I mean, you have to reach down and unhook it off of that rock. So when the first couple of times I went up there, this is before I took Lindsay up there, but the first couple of times I went up there, I mean, I probably lost 18 flies in the first day fishing just with sinkers. And I thought, man, this isn't going to work.
Well,
So
that day, George, that day that kid caught that big brown,
oh yeah.
that was the first time I'd went up there with you, and
What was it? Yeah.
I broke off 16 times that day.
Anyway, so what we started doing is tying a weighted balance leash, just weighted with, a different size of tungsten beads, but trying to balance leech. And so the way I fish it, it doesn't drag like these sinkers do. It basically hangs straight down from that indicator, but that bottom fly,
It's more like this here.
more like that. But that bottom fly, I kind of watch my indicator, and if it starts to tick along the bottom, I'll move my indicator down my line so that it effectively moves the fly up an inch or two at a time until it's just, once in a while I might see a tiny little bump, but other than that, I just use that fly like that. And on that river, that's an extremely effective way to catch fish from. I mean, Lindsay's been with me. We've had some pretty amazing days. I think my best day ever there was 42 fish.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing about George is with this same rigging, he can fish this skinny water, what we call frog water, and he's the master of it. And I mean, this water is almost not even moving. I mean, one day he caught, this year up on the Snake, he had caught 6 or 7 fish before I even had a bump. It's like, what the heck are you doing? So talk about the nuances of your indicator and the frog water.
Well, so that'll be something that it's just a patience game, and you've got to, as you throw your fly in there and it'll move down, you'll just see it just kind of bumping along. And I mean, if that indicator, it won't plunge, it just kind of starts to slow down a little bit. You'll just notice that the speed changes. I mean, there's no ripple in front of the indicator. There's no, it might be coming down and the indicator might move a half an inch to one side or the other. I mean, I'm talking nuance, right? I'm talking, if anything changes, if it's coming down the river and that indicator moves to the side a half an inch, or just starts to slow down a little bit, or you see just the leader on the other side of that Oris indicator just kind of tip down a little bit, but the indicator won't move. But you'll just see that leader on the one side just tip ever so slightly. You just give it a little kind of what I would call move it off the bottom. Just pull it. Just think to yourself, oh, it's on the bottom. I'm just going to move it off. And what do I move it, Lindsay? A couple of inches, inches. Down goes I mean, you just can't believe how many times that's a fish. Most people would never, ever set the hook, but indicator fishing is about setting the hook. And I'm not talking marlin set. I'm talking just pull the indicator a couple of inches, tight line, pull it a couple inches, pull it 3 inches, a couple of inches, and just let it keep floating. And you'll be amazed at how many fish will catch.
Another thing you got to remember too is you have about a second to set the hook.
Oh yeah.
One day I was fishing on the Provo and I was on a high bank. I had a drop shot rig on like this, and the sun was high going down in the water, and I was fishing against some riprap. And those big browns like to hide in those rocks. And I was floating along. I could see my fly, and I had what I call a Jason's worm on. That thing's like a number 4 hook, mustad hook, and it's all orange. It's really bright. So I could see it under the water there about 2 feet deep. And this big brown comes up, eats that fly, and spit it out in about 1 second. So he ate it and he spit it out. So you got to remember that these fish, they have no hands, right? They have to put everything in their mouth. And so as soon as they bite that and they know that it's not a real live bug, they spit it out. So you got to be quick on that.
And so if you look at that, so there's what Lindsay's talking about right there. That's a big fly. That's their Jason's worm, right, Lynn?
Yep, that's it right there. So you don't have a lot of time. And so you've got, I mean, the one thing I see a lot of new fishermen is they're not concentrating. I mean, you got to be dead on that, on your game 100% of the time, because as soon as that thing twitches, you got to twitch back. And if you don't, you're going to miss fish after fish after fish. I heard Lance Egan on a webinar once, and he said, I've never told anybody one time in my entire life you're setting the hook too much.
Yeah, I would agree.
So that's George's technique. It's amazing. We're going to be doing a lot of other stuff in that regard. I'm going to show you basically, if you compare this setup right here to a tapered leader, what happens is the tapered leader is going to be hooked right here, loop to loop in the connection. But the top end, instead of 20 pounds, it's more like 40 or 45 pounds. It's really thick. Then it tapers down, 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 down. We used to fish it, when I first started fishing, I'd just fish it in line. Okay. And what that means is I'd put my sinkers about 18 inches up or a foot up above the first fly. And then I'd tie the first fly on, clinch knot, put the second fly a foot down to 18 inches, the next fly a foot down to 18 inches, and real simple. Okay. Now, you can do the same thing. You can take a tapered leader and tie surgeon's knots with tags on it and fish it the same way, other than the bottom fly. So this fly would be a tag, this fly would be a tag, and this fly wouldn't. Okay. But still, the biggest difference between inline and drop shot is, pretty much exactly how high up your fly is, because your line's tight, right? It's like, okay, this fly is going to be about 6 inches above the bottom. This one's going to be about a foot to a little more. This is going to be a foot and a half to 2 feet above the bottom. And so what happens is, if you're catching the fish all the time on the top fly, it may not just be the fly, it may be the location in the water. Okay, because these fish will vary in the water column on where they're feeding. Okay, so the thing about it is when you're fishing this system, you're always changing your flies, you're always changing your sinkers, you're always changing your indicator to different areas, right? So Ladd was asking me about, George and I last week, about the sinkers. You want removable sinkers. And there's certain guys like Pat Dorsey. I heard him talk once. He's a big guide over on the North Platte in Colorado. And he says, never fish with sinkers that have that are removable, because those little wings will catch and snag up. Well, I'll tell you what, how many times a day are you switching your sinkers? Number of them, George?
Oh, all the time.
All day, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, if the water's slower, I have less sinkers. If the water's shallower, I have less sinkers. If the water's deep and fast, I mean, I fished with as many as 12 BBs before.
Hey, Lindsay and George, can I say something? This is Kimball.
Yeah, jump in.
Okay, so I'm up on the green last week, and I took everything you guys said in our meeting, and it's been really valuable to me. I've actually started to catch fish, and it's been fun. But anyway, I was at the Farson Hole below the Farson Bridge, and the water's ripping. I mean, it is just ripping. And I kept adding sinkers because I wasn't getting to the bottom. I ended up with 10. I've never fished with 10 sinkers before to get to the bottom. I had 10 sinkers on that, and guess what happened?
Fish
You
on.
started catching fish.
I started catching fish, and I caught, in a matter of an hour, I caught like 7 or 8 fish, and it was a ball. But the point is if you're not where the fish are, you're not going to catch fish. And I just kept adding them and adding them and adding them until I finally got where I needed to be. And I appreciate the instruction you guys have given us on that.
You bet. On the Green River in Utah, I'd see these guys with their indicator was a balloon. And this balloon was about the size of a baseball. And I'm going, what the heck are these guys doing? So a buddy of mine fished with them. And I said, did they fish that technique? He said, yeah. I said, call him back, tell him as soon as he's got an open day, I want to go. So I went up there. They were fishing. The leader was 16 feet long, and the indicator was a balloon. And they were fishing with about 10 sinkers. These sinkers that we fish are the size BB. So they're like the size of a BB, right? So he had like 10 BB sinkers on. He had 3 of the 3/0 sinkers, and he had one great big giant sinker. I mean, it was unbelievable. But these holes that they were fishing were, 10 to 12 feet deep. And those guides down there, I've never seen one ever, not one time, get out of their boat than to launch it or to take it out of the water. And if you look at the A section of the Green River in Utah, I think it's 8 miles long, and 6 miles of it is just, you can't hardly fish it from the bank. The last 2 miles are really pretty good wade fishing. But the point is, you're going to be changing sinkers too. You're probably not going to have and indicators. You're probably not going to have a baseball sized balloon on and a half a pound of weight on the bottom. But the point is this, like Kimball's saying, you got to be on the bottom or close to it to start with. See, and if you got 3 flies on, you could literally fish the same fly with all 3, and it would kind of tell you the depth that they're eating the worm or the bob scud or whatever it is. So just know, if you're not catching fish, change something up. Okay. Now, here's another thing that I feel is really important. When you first start off fishing, you want to do everything almost exactly the same every time. Okay. Because if you do that, then if you make a change, then that change is what's making the difference, right? So if you're fishing with this setup and you're not catching any fish, and you add 2 more sinkers, then you start catching fish. It's like, great, okay, I need 4 sinkers on. And you're catching fish, and you're catching them all on the top fly, and it's a WD-40. Okay, well, what I do is I'm going to put on another WD-40 of another color on the second fly, fish it, okay, see if I'm catching them. Okay, no, yeah, okay, and then there's times I've had 3 bob scuds on or 3 squirmy worms or whatever the fly is at all different levels, because that's all the fish want to eat that day. Okay. Any other closing thoughts on this, George?
No, I mean, I think we've covered it pretty carefully, but but the important thing is after you get these, go out and try it. Take some time and just go try it. And
well, and the other thing is you need to practice tying this rig up. Okay. I mean, let's take a quick look at some of these. Let's see, where am I at here? There we go.
Hey, Lindsay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Roger. You say if nothing's happening, you got to change, and so you do change and you do. So how long does it, what do you wait? Maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes before you say, okay, it's not working? What's your time frame?
Well, for me, first of all, when you're fishing and you become good at fishing a river, say it's the Provo, you know where the fish are. Okay. I mean, as a guide, you're fishing it at least once a week, maybe 3 times a week, right? And you fish it and you know where the fish are and where you're catching them. If I get to a hole and I'm not catching fish, I'm changing up in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 at the most. Okay.
Okay.
If I don't know that there's fish there, that's a different story. Okay, George, why don't you answer that your way?
well, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, if I'm on a river that I've never fished and I don't know where the fish are, I might, you just got to go by experience. And so, being on the water and doing this is really, really important stuff. But I would agree if I, for example, go on the green and we're fishing a certain place. I mean, but Roger, you even get to learn, for example, like George's Rock, Lindsay, right? There's certain times of the year that there's not a lot of fish there. And then there's certain times of the year there's a lot of fish there. And you get to learn that. Plus you get to learn, what they're eating, what they're not. And if we're not catching fish there, then I'm changing.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just going to change flies because I know there's fish there. Especially, for example, if you're fishing on the green and you're not catching a whitefish, then you better be changing because there's nothing eating, right?
Right.
Now,
George.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I probably wouldn't go, 3 hours without changing, Roger. If I don't catch it, if I don't get at least a hit in the first 30 minutes, I'm changing my flies, or
Right.
even 15 minutes.
So let's say you get your first fish of the day. Do you kind of do a stomach pump to see what they're eating, or do you?
Sometimes.
You do, huh?
Well, it depends. Depends how
do.
cold it is. I don't want to get my hands wet. No, I don't.
Okay, now Roger, this is where the mentoring program can be a big deal for you, right? So let's say you're only going to be able to fish twice a month or whatever, on the Provo. And if I'm fishing it at least once a week, I know what the fish are eating. I know where the fish are eating. You call me up and say, Lindsay, I'm going out on the Provo today. What do I need to fish with? Lad does this already. I say, this is what I've been catching them on. This is my rigging. And then you'll get better and better and better and better. Okay. As you learn the river and how it works. So, if you're like George and I mean, I have one of the slams I'm doing right now is I'm catching 1 fish a week for the entire year. So, I mean, I've caught at least 1 fish a week so far every week this year, and I'm going to do it for the entire year. Well, some people may only be able to fish once a month or whatever. And so you have to rely on your mentors to help you so you can know what to do and you're not wasting time. One other thing is I have a set of confidence flies. I'd say, George and I mentioned this before. We were come back from the snake one day and George laughed and he says, I don't know why I carry 500 flies. I fish with the same 10 every time or less. Right, George?
Or less, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, if you're fishing with flies that you've caught a lot of fish with in these rivers before, and they're different, every river's got their own flies that, some are better, but there's a certain few, especially the dirty flies that people poo-poo, a squirmy worm, an egg, a mop fly, some of that stuff, they just catch, San Juan worm. They just catch fish, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, those things will help.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so now let's look real quick at the basic flies or knots you need to understand. Okay, first of all is the loop to loop. Okay, so if you look at this picture, let's say this is your fly line, okay, and it's green. You're going to have a welded loop that they've welded onto the end of your fly line. And if you're fishing with a tapered leader, it already has a loop on there. So you just interchange those loops and pull them together, and it looks like a square knot here at the bottom, and you're good to go, right? Now, if you if you're building your own leader and you don't know how to tie a perfection loop, you can tie a clinch knot that everybody knows how to tie. That's the fisherman's knot. You can tie a clinch knot right onto that welded loop. Now, like George and I were talking about today, that's going to cut in to this line a whole lot more than a loop-to-loop connection. But, if you're not catching big fish, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Okay, now let's go down and, oops, where'd it go? I thought I had these lined up. Okay, let's see here. Okay, well, I got to show a perfection loop for sure, so that's not it. Talk about a perfection loop while I'm pulling this up, George.
Well, I mean, a perfection loop is, it doesn't really, I don't know what kind of loop that is, but a perfection loop is something, I mean, if you just look how to tie a perfection loop, you can tie a perfection loop in, I don't know, 5 seconds. Does it take that long, Lindsay?
No,
I mean, it's like loop, loop, loop. I mean, it's one of the best, there you go. It's one of the best knots ever. I mean, and it's really hard I tie mine a little different where I make a loop and then I make another loop and then I just bring the line in between them and pull it through. You know how that works, Linz?
That's exactly how I do it.
And it's super simple, but at the end, it looks just like, the bottom right-hand picture. You have that tags pointing 90 degrees off of the main line and
right
if it looks like that, it's tied right every time. And that thing will not come undone. I don't care what you do. Never
Now,
gonna.
one thing you need to do when you tie these is you got to have something to pull this tight on. Okay. I have a pointed tooth right here. So I make that loop and I just pull it against that pointed tooth. And if you don't pull that thing tight, it can cinch right up on you. Okay. But like George says, once you get that thing tight, it ain't going anywhere.
It'll never come undone.
So if you have this, let's say your fly line doesn't have a welded loop on it. You can do welded loops yourself, okay? Or you can do a perfection loop on both sides, okay? So there's your perfection loop. And the only other knot I really want to make sure everybody knows is the surgeon's knot. So talk about surgeon's knot, George.
I mean, a surgeon's, it's really simple. If you can put, you lay your line like this, you make a loop and then you just twice or 3 times take both of them through and pull it tight and spit on it. And that's what it looks like, just like Lindsay. And you'll have a tag coming off the top and the bottom. And then you just, for like a dropper, you cut the top piece off and leave the bottom hanging and then go down the next length and tie another one. It's a really simple knot. It's what a surgeon uses to tie stitches, right?
Yep.
Essentially the same thing.
Really important. So let's say this green line here is your fly line. Okay.
Not this.
That's
This
not
is
gonna happen. Let's say your fly line's to the left, right? So when you tie this, you can see this little tag here, and you can see this little tag here. Just remember, you've always got to cut the top tag off, not the bottom one. The one closest to your fly, okay, stays long. The one closest to your fly rod is cut off. If you make that mistake, you'll untie it when you catch a fish. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you understand those few knots, you're in Fat City, right? You come in there, you tie a perfection loop, tie a clinch knot for your flies. Whoops, I got to tie one more, show you one more. Talk about the Davy knot, George.
Double Davy. Well, you're gonna have to get online and look how to tie that because I can't explain it. But the double Davy knot, since I learned the double Davy knot, I don't even tie a clinch knot anymore. I mean, I do once in a while, like maybe to tie my 0x onto my perfection loop off my 20-pound test section, right? But for tying on flies or anything else, I just tie that double Davy because that double Davy is super simple to tie for me. And I don't have to keep track. It's just, I get the thing in my line, I turn it over, through, tied, done. And it's a tiny knot, right? It's especially really super good for like tying really tiny dry flies. Little, like when I dry fly fish, I like to fish with a size 16 or 18 ant a lot up in Canada. And that's just such a tiny knot. And when you're fishing with like a size 20 or size 18 WD-40 as a nymph, it's just the knot is tiny. And I honestly have never had one come undone. If you tie it right, I've had one come undone if I didn't get it tied right. But if anyone I've ever tied right, never comes undone, ever.
Now this diagram right here is a single Davy. That's all I do. I don't do a double. I've never had it fail one time ever. This is how easy it is. You just string it through your hook eye, and the loop, the tag end is always on the bottom. Okay. All you do is you come around the top and go through the hole. Okay. And then all you have to do is bring it around and take it through the hole right there. Pull it tight, you're done. Okay. So when you're doing a double, you just come back one more time, correct, George?
Well, it's actually a little different, but it's a little bit different. So you see where on the top one where you go behind, where you
Right
first
there.
thing is you go behind and then up, over and around. On a double Davy, instead of going behind the knot, you go in front of the knot, back through the loop, under the loop, back over and through. That,
Okay.
It's just a little different.
All right, I'll have to look at that. But the point is I tie this. The only time I tie a clinch knot anymore on a fly is if it's a bigger fly. I don't know. I've had clinch knots fail, and you really have to pull on those tight to make sure it's snug down because they can come undone. But I've never had this come undone one time. So anyway, guys, as far as your knots, what you need to do, like you, Roger, you're not going to be fishing for a while. What you need to do is you need to take these riggings that we've showed you, okay, and you can go on to the Fly Fishing 101 and it shows them. It shows these different knots, and you need to practice rigging up, okay? You need to, when you're sitting there watching TV, practice tying these flies. Now, within the next week, you're going to see some of the knots. I'm doing some videos. What I'm using is parachute cord. In fact, I started some today. So I'll have like a blue and a yellow parachute cord, and I'll tie the knot so you can see it real well. Then I'll come back with some 30-pound chameleon and some 30-pound amnesia in 2 different colors, tie them up in leader so you can see them. But you need to practice, practice, practice. I can't tell you how much time you're going to save yourself, especially fishing in this drop shot kind of rigging, if you know how to tie the knots well and fast. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope everybody's learned something from that. Any questions on any of these riggings that we've talked about tonight? No questions? Any last comments, George, before we close off tonight?
I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty carefully. So there's just if you have questions, ask next week.
Okay. Well, thanks for getting on, everybody. We'll sign off. And this particular video tonight is going to be put on a permanent format platform where you'll be able to watch it. You'll be able to send your buddies to it. That's why I spent all day basically making sure we had all the diagrams so you could see what we were talking about. So watch for that coming soon, and appreciate y'all getting on. We'll have the affiliate call here right after. It won't be long, just a few comments because of the other, and we'll call it a day. So thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Good night.
see you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for putting the time today to